I'm happy to give this talk. I would have liked to have my colleague Garrett Heineck give this talk. He was a research agronomist with the USDA-ARS. He took a different position with Smith Seed Services, but I'm going to talk about the cover crop work that he's done in hops and then try to relate it to grapes. That's my takeaway. There are similarities between the two systems, and I think that some of the results he found are very applicable to vineyards. So with that, I'm going to take it away. So this is lessons learned from cover crop performance and soil water dynamics in hop yards. So why do we cover crop? We want to protect soils from ourselves and ourselves from soil. So without living roots or soil coverage, basically you can end up losing soil either through wind, right? So it can blow away or it can wash away. And inhalable silicates are not good. It's something that people are worried about with asbestos. It's often under talked about with soil. So soil dust is often made of silicates. And so we don't really want to breathe that in. The Yakima Valley has kind of higher rates of asthma and other problems compared to other regions. And so there could be some contribution from dust, though I haven't seen hard data on that. In vineyards, so the picture I showed was from like dryland wheat systems, but in vineyards, we are often planting on slopes, right? And so water-driven erosion of soil can be problematic. Here I am walking through a vineyard in the Columbia Valley AVA. You can see there's the minimal soil coverage here. Part of it is because of the soil texture. This is a fine sand. So it's just really hard to establish cover crops here. Some folks will seed in annual wheat and then do alternate rows of annual wheat with resident vegetation. So that's what's been done here to try to help stop water-driven soil erosion. And so it can be very effective. But today I'm going to talk about other things besides annual grasses and resident vegetation and kind of your options there. So as Garrett likes to say, and as he led by example, cover crops work, but they are work. Garrett was often out looking to see how his seedlings were doing. The cover crop trials that he ran were a lot of work. He tried a whole bunch of different varieties of cover crops. So and really kind of narrowed down some really good selections that work in hop yards, and I do think that they're very relevant for grape growers in Eastern Washington and probably other parts of the United States. So as Noelle mentioned, growers are concerned about cover crop water uptake, and that's something that we are facing, or that growers in our area are facing. So here is a water year map from the Bureau of Reclamation. This is for the Yakima watershed. So in green is our previous year's water allocation or storage in the reservoir system. In red is the average, and in blue is the current year. So last year, we had major shortages of water. Rosa Irrigation District cut water allocations by 40% and ended up cutting off water completely in September, which was a challenge for growers. SVID had water cut off October 6th. We were scrambling to refill our soil profile with water before winter with that October 6th cutoff. The current water year is in blue. We have more water in storage, but we don't have much snowpack. So it'll be very interesting to see what the current water year is. So as we're talking about cover crops, it's really important to acknowledge that they do use water. But there can be some real benefits to them because weeds also use water, right? That's the reality of it. And so Garrett started off as a dryland agronomist. And so he would go out with this auger and go talk to dryland wheat farmers and farmers of other grain crops to talk about their water needs. And so he would go out with growers and they'd be looking down deep, looking at how wet the soil was, and it was a topic of conversation for him. And so he kind of tried to adapt this mentality around water concern to hop yards and other perennial crops as well. And so I'm going to talk about his work that was recently submitted called An Assessment of Cover Crop Species, Suitability and Water Dynamics in Hop. And I really am going to work hard to make this relevant to grape growers. Hop growers do apply more water than grape growers, but there's still a lot of overlap in terms of cover crop selection. Typically, hop growers till their tractor rows, but there is this growing interest in not tilling the tractor rows, but putting in cover crops or allowing vegetation to grow because dust transmits mites, which is a big problem in hops, and can be, in grapes you can get sandburn and other things on your grapes if your soil is blowing around. So it's important to make sure it stays in place. In terms of the species that were selected for his trials, he basically looked at 3 seeding time periods. So a fall seed where the crops would jump up and start growing and then carry on through the spring. Then he looked at early spring seeding of cover crops, and then he had some late spring cover crops that he tried as well. So this is some of the selection of cover crops that he seeded in through October and November. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Yeah, you can. So these are annual grasses, right? So he worked putting in cereal rye, triticale, and winter barley. Then he put in a series of perennial grasses and seeded those in the fall. Then he tried a radish and then an alfalfa as a legume. So these are the forbs. Then he also tried a mustard in the spring. Then did sainfoin, subterranean clover, and bird's foot trefoil in the spring. And then he looked at a kind of late season warm grass seed or cover crop. So he looked at sorghum, millet, teff, buffalo grass, and Bermuda grass. And this is all kind of relative to his thoughts. In dryland wheat, what they often do is they have a fallow control. They go through and till up the soil and try to accumulate water. They do alternate year cropping by trying to accumulate water. So this is kind of the ultimate control, is leaving things fallow. What are the water dynamics in a fallow field versus having cover crops? And so he installed small plots in hop yards. Here he is drilling in seed with Anna, who was a technician for Kayla Altendorf's group, who's a research geneticist with the USDA. And so they did all this at Pear Acres, which is one of the farms associated with IREC. In terms of their experimental design, there's a series of experiments that were run. So they did 2 years of trials with the warm season grasses, forbs, and cool season grasses relative to fallow plots. So that work was done in 2023 and 2024. And then there was an extension of this work where there were really direct comparisons between perennial grasses and annual grasses in 2024 and 2025. In terms of what they were doing for moisture dynamics, they were looking at available water content, or I should say volumetric water content. Sorry, don't want to confuse those two things because it's very important. They're different. And so he used a neutron probe for that work. So he sunk in access tubes down to 48 inches in line with the hops, about 28 inches away from the hops, and then another 56 inches away from that border. So it's basically where the hops are growing, right next to where the cover crops are growing, and then in the middle of the cover crops. And so even though they apply more water in hops, their rows are wider. So they have 13, 14 foot rows, which is quite a bit wider than most vineyards. And so the center of those rows can be pretty dry. The drip tubes are pretty far away. And so, cover crops that will do well need to sink their roots down deep to access the lateral flowing water, which he outlined here, right, as these arrows kind of moving sideways. Here's Garrett out in the field with the neutron probe, measuring the volumetric water content. You can see some of the access tubes. So here's one of the access tubes right next to the cover crop, and here's the one right in the middle. This looks like a perennial wheatgrass. So this is kind of the full experimental design. All this took place in hop yards, as I said, and was several multi-year experiments to figure out kind of what cover crops will work best in these systems. In terms of weather and irrigation, the growing degree days, this is a little bit of a short year, but it was pretty similar year to year. So 2023, 2024, and 2025 had similar growing degree days, at least September through June. There was very different water availability between 2023, 2024, and 2025. So in 2023, we didn't get much rain. I try to convert everything over to units non-metric units. So hopefully this makes sense. But in 2023, we got about 5 inches of water during that growing period. Whereas in 2024 and 2025, there was more water. They also ended up irrigating more over time. So in 2023, they irrigated less than in 2024 and 2025. So some of the results that you will see, there's kind of this factorial combination of like water availability versus cover crop selection, but I still think it's very, very informative. So the idea here is that at least the 2023 results it's a really dry year and they didn't irrigate very much. So things that survived will do well under really water limited conditions. In terms of what came up in these different systems or with these different crops, the winter seeded crops came up well. They're highlighted in yellow. The spring seeded crops did not come well. They generally came up well, except for the bird's foot trefoil. And then the late spring seeded crops, the buffalo grass and the Bermuda grass did not come up. It did not germinate well. So really only the sorghum, millet, and teff did well. What grew? This is a shorter list. So in terms of the annual grasses, cereal rye and triticale survived throughout the season. For the perennial grasses, the crested wheatgrass, the intermediate wheatgrass, wild rye, and thick spike wheatgrass did well. The forbs that were planted in the fall did not do well. In terms of the early spring seeded crops, only mustard grew well. And for the late spring seeded crops, only sorghum and millet grew well. And this is because of a lot of different factors. So for the winter seeded crops, winter and frost damage is a big deal, hard to survive. So they had to be pretty hardy. Traffic in hop yards, similar to vineyards, is a problem. If the crop is not resilient to getting run over by tractors, it's not going to survive. Weed pressure is another thing. We have this in vineyards. There's often a big weed seed bank. You need your cover crops to jump up quick, otherwise they're going to get outcompeted by weeds, which is a problem. And then finally, drought is a huge issue. If your cover crops do not sink roots down quickly, they're not going to have enough water to survive. And so kind of the selection criteria that was imposed on this experiment, these cover crops, the cover crops that did well had to survive all of these challenges. And these are directly relevant to vineyards. In terms of moisture near the surface of the soils, so the top bars here were volumetric moisture content in 2023, I believe, in mid-May. And then this is kind of how much was lost through mid-June. So the fallow controls had the most soil moisture, but they also lost among the most soil moisture through mid-June. Many of the other crops did not have that challenge. The pearl millet and sorghum were seeded late, so that's why they have so much soil moisture in May. The cereal rye, triticale, and these intermediate and crested wheatgrass were seeded in the fall, so they did take up some water through the fall and early spring, but they kind of go dormant later on in the season, so they end up using less water. In terms of canopy density, here's Garrett out there taking pictures of the canopy. He was really curious. His goal was to eliminate weeds in hop yards, puncture vine, Russian thistle, things like that. So he was really curious about canopy density and the ability to outcompete weeds. And what he found was that there's kind of there's an interaction between time and water availability in terms of closing up the canopy to outcompete weeds. So for a lot of the crops that he tried, this is data from 2023 and 2024. Just the kind of take home here is the cereal rye and the triticale, so the annual grasses, they jump up fast. They start closing up their canopy pretty quickly. And then by late spring, you're basically getting at least 50% soil coverage from these annual grasses. The perennial grasses were slower to take off. They started to take off more in 2024, but they were still slow. However, by summer, a lot of these had really jumped up. The intermediate wheatgrass and crested wheatgrass had pretty good canopy coverage. And by 2024, you're looking at more than 50% canopy coverage by summertime with these perennial grasses. Now, mustard, broadleaf had really good coverage. It was outcompeting a lot of the weeds, had really good canopy coverage, as did the annual grasses. They really closed up. And I'll show some pictures of this just so you can get a better idea of what it actually looks like. In terms of biomass, certainly these annual grasses produced a lot more biomass than the perennial grasses in the first year. But by the second year, these perennial grasses were putting down a lot of biomass, getting close to 2.5 tons per acre of biomass for the intermediate wheatgrass. And so this really helps these perennial grasses outcompete weeds because they're putting on so much biomass. A lot of this came down to the amount of water that was available. So in 2023, there was pretty limited water, and that limited some of the biomass accumulation, even for the annual grass, the cereal rye. Over time, there was more water availability. That was just from increased rainfall and changes to irrigation that allowed more biomass accumulation for both the cereal rye and the perennial crops. So again, we want to learn from fallow how well or how much water do these cover crops take up relative to the fallow control. A lot of this is, the surface water gets depleted pretty quickly, but the deep water isn't depleted that quickly. There's a lot of lateral flow in these hop yards and also in vineyards that can support cover crops. So how much are they using? So this isn't a water limited year. This is down deep. This is around between 2 and 4 feet. And so this is just kind of days after May 18th, looking out over a couple months to see how much water was being used. And so what we see here, this is the fallow plot is in gray and the cereal rye is in brown. So we do see some depletion with it. The annual grass, it is depleting some of the soil moisture. It is what it is, right? In a wetter year, they actually deplete quite a bit more moisture. You can see it in the crop. So this is kind of how that annual cereal rye did with limited water. When there was more water, there was more complete canopy coverage, outcompeting the weeds. Certainly, it is using quite a bit of water relative to the fallow control, but Garrett has a really nice picture. Weeds will also use water. And you see this in vineyards, right? Like most vineyard tractor rows, people are just mowing weeds down, often not a lot of tillage in Washington. And so the weeds are going to use water that's in the alley. So why not have a cover crop that you like? So Garrett has some ideas in terms of how to get these cover crops best established. There's a variety of ways to do it. Garrett was very much like, let's spray, and then we're going to seed, and then we're going to spray again. I'm more of a, let's just see, like we'll drill and seed and see how it does. I'm less into spraying. So I'm gonna present Garrett's slides here where he kind of outlines a spray program and a seeding program. And then I'm going to talk about kind of what we've done in our vineyard, which is fewer sprays. So his idea in terms of establishing the perennial crops is to basically spray out your vineyard in the fall, and then, or your hop yard in this case, then plant an annual grass in the spring, let it grow up, try to outcompete the weeds, then spray it out in the fall again. And then in year 2, you do a late spring spray, and then you seed in triticale or mustard, let that grow up. And then do a late fall spray in year 3, seed in intermediate wheatgrass or crested wheatgrass. At this point, hopefully your weed seed bank is a little bit more depleted, and it will give these perennial grasses a better chance to get established. And then by year 4, you should be getting a lot of biomass. That's his hope. This is kind of what it looks like in terms of the annual grasses. This is the same picture, but with annual grasses, you get a lot of good soil coverage, very quickly. You don't get that as quickly with the perennial grasses. They start a lot smaller, but by year 2, you have really good soil coverage. And so his thoughts are give the perennial grasses the best chance possible to establish, and then let them rip. And so here he is with his intermediate wheatgrass, April 1st, second year after seeding. You don't see a lot of Russian thistle there, right? It looks pretty good. And so he was, anyway, he was very pleased about this. As you can see, he's very excited. I really, anyway, I appreciate that about Garrett. So what does this look like in a vineyard? So when we drilled in our annual grasses, we just mowed low, we didn't spray, and then we took a normal seed drill and drilled right into this residue that's there. And we got pretty good results. Germination was good. Our perennial wheatgrass came up well. This is what it looked like in October of 2025. We drilled in perennial wheatgrass again in 2025. This is what it looks like right now. You can actually kind of see, it's hard to see here, but in the distance, this is where our treatment changes. So it's like a little bit different color. So it just highlights the perennial wheatgrass is taking off. It is establishing well, and it's nice to have that cover in our vineyard. And I'm very excited to see what it looks like in April. My guess is it's going to be big and bushy, which is great. Garrett also has some, I think, some pretty cool ideas in terms of other cover crop rotations that could be implemented. So again, spray out in October, then seed in an annual grass in early spring, spray that out in September. And then he had some ideas about putting in fall-seeded chicory and fall-seeded sainfoin. I think those are cool ideas. Chicory is a beautiful flower, attracts a lot of pollinators. It's a pretty vigorous weed. You often see it by the side of roads, right? So it could probably do quite well in water-limited environments. And then he thought about putting in spring-seeded safflower. It's another really good dry season crop, produces some really beautiful flowers. Here's a moth kind of feeding getting nectar from these flowers. So these are just kind of different cover cropping ideas that are pretty unconventional. I'm hoping I'm not blowing through this too fast, Ray. You may have to go a little bit long. And then in terms of other ideas, so you can do undervine cover crops. This is not widely done, at least in Washington. We're still trying to figure it out. Last spring we had pretty good germination from our undervine legumes. We found that they struggled to compete against the grasses that were there, but they came back again in the fall before we hilled. We're going to try hydroseeding. So this is Mary Redelek, who spoke last year here, talked a bit about hydroseeding, especially subterranean clover in Australian vineyards. And so we think this is actually a pretty good and scalable idea. This is one of the concerns that we always had kind of broadcasting and raking in under vine is how is a grower going to do this on hundreds of acres? The labor requirement is crazy. But hydroseeding takes a lot of that out. And so we're gonna do that this year and see how it runs. Hopefully it works well and we can report back. But this seems like a good way to establish an undervine cover crop is spraying it on. And for that, thanks for having me. I wish Garrett was giving this talk. He's a great speaker, but sadly he's not here. There were a lot of cool groups that worked on this research, including myself. And so with that, any questions?
Great, thank you. Yeah, are there any questions? Wow, okay, he answered all of them. If you come back with any cover crop questions, we're just not going to answer them. Okay, at least I got one giggle. Thanks, guys. There we go. All right, we'll have Ray go next, and then there'll be plenty of time afterwards for questions. Ray, please go an extra 5 minutes to get those WSDA credits.
Yeah, sorry, I went way faster than I intended.
No, you did great.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ray Liu, and I'm a assistant professor of weed science. I'm based at the Prosser Ag Research and Extension Center. So as we're loading the slides, I use AI to generate this picture, include all the perennial crops in this region. So I don't know why the apple trees are growing at the very end of the vineyard. Nobody would do that probably. So you can tell this is not a real picture. But today I'm glad to be here, and thanks for the invitation to talk about the weed management in perennial crops. And so we'll be focusing on the vineyard. So first, why do we manage weeds? So weeds cause a lot of problems to us. Nobody likes them in your vineyard. They take the water, nutrients, and they interfere with the harvest operations and different kinds of operations in the vineyard. They can also host disease and insects. So they also compete with the cover crops, and also they're not really nice to look at. So those are a couple of reasons that we don't want weeds in our cropping systems. And the list goes on. Here is the picture. And can someone tell me what's growing in the middle between the vineyard rows? Is it a cover crop?
Looks like kosher.
Kochia? Almost right. Russian thistle.
Oh.
So they're both called tumbleweeds, and so Russian thistle is the one that we see quite often on the roadside. And the earlier that picture, because of the wind in the region, and so we have a lot of Russian thistle seeds floating around. And this is a annual weed species, and the stems have reddish and purple stripes. The leaves are alternate, long and very thin, almost look like needles. So you can see the pictures on the right side. The flowers are very small. They're hiding in between of the kind of the leaf axils. And the mature plants breaks off at the ground level when they are matured, and so they tumble. That's why they got the name tumbleweed. And it can spread the seeds when the wind picks up and when the plant rolls over. And some of you might remember there's a piece of news back in 2020 when people are welcoming the new year, but some truck drivers got buried in the tumbleweed, and so had to be rescued with the snow plows. So these weeds cause serious concerns to us. So it's a quite intense picture here. Also, many of you are probably familiar with this weed species, puncture vine. So it also called stickers or goat head. It's a summer annual broadleaf. So many people are probably familiar with the dense root system, and it can form the dense mat, so it covers the whole ground. And also it has the yellow flowers. It has 5 petals. You can see the picture on the left side. And the fruit are very sharp, pointed burrs. So it can stick to tires, bike tires or car tires. And one plant can produce up to 5,000 seeds per season. The mat it's quite competitive. The seeds can injure animals, pets, and people. And also the nitrate can cause problems to sheep and cattle. So managing these difficult weed species, it's quite it's a challenge to manage the weed species, and which means that we can't rely just on one method. So we need to integrate different kinds of method so that we can achieve the results that we want. So here is a picture, or kind of shows you the integrated weed management, different components in there. So we have the mechanical, culture, chemical, and biological control components. And this whole system called integrated weed management system. So it includes many methods in a growing season so that the producers can use the best chance to control the troublesome weeds. And so we'll go over the different components from the integrated weed management the whole system. And so here, the first one we're going to talk about is the mechanical control. So mechanical control is basically kill a weed with direct a direct method. So we get rid of the weed by blocking it or makes the environment unsuitable. So here is a picture of the very conventional mechanical weed management method, hoeing. So I'm sure many of you have probably pulled the weeds out or hoe it in your garden. So there are different tools that you can use for hoeing the weeds out. Also, we have some of the a little bit more advanced technology like electrical weeding. So this is a technology that uses the tractor power. So on the back over where it says the power XPS, that's a power generator. It's a PTO. So this system uses the tractor power and convert it into high intense power, the electrical power. And in that way, it shoots the electricity through the plant. So here is a picture that shows on the bottom how the electrical current goes through the plant. And so from this device, wherever the metal plates, see if I can get, I want to get the pointer out. Okay, let's see. So over here, this is the device that wherever this metal plate touches the ground, so the electricity shoots through the metal plate, and then when it touches the weed, the electrons will go through the weed and basically burns the weed from the inside out. So it cooks the water inside of the plant and just burns the plant that way. And so this technology, the Zaso company owns this technology. And so currently there are many units are being tested in perennial crops. So in vineyards or tree fruit production. And this is more of a kind of current technology. And also we want to talk about the cultural control. So cultural control, like Devin talked about earlier about the cover crops. So that's one method for the cultural control. Basically, cultural control is to reduce the plant establishment or reproduction or disposal and survival. So here is a picture shows you the solarization. So basically, it uses the white plastic cover on the top and it tracks the sunlight. So underneath, then the weed that are laying, the weed seeds on the top of the soil layer would get heated up because of the sunlight. So the solarization basically using the sunlight, the power, and heating the weed seed. So that prevents the weed seed from germinating or emerging. And other methods like using mulch or crop rotation, those are the common ways that you can control weeds with the cultural control. And chemical control, many people are familiar with this. Relatively speaking, the cultural control using chemicals are relatively lower cost and more quite effective. And so the chemicals, herbicides, we have pre-emergence herbicides and post-emergence herbicides. So pre-emergence herbicides, we use it before the weed seeds germinated. So before the season, usually it requires some rain or water activation. So it provides a layer on the top of the soil, so a couple inches, and the weed seed would get inhibited from germinating. And post-emergence herbicides like 2,4-D, glyphosate, and dicamba, those are commonly used post-emergence herbicides. So not particularly in the vineyard. The vines are quite sensitive to 2,4-D and dicamba, so I'm not recommending you to use it in the vineyard. But here are just a few examples that you can control the weeds with the post-emergence herbicides. And also we have selectivity between the different kinds of herbicides. So some are specifically only working on the grass, like the group 1 herbicides. So they're the herbicide groups that only works on controlling the grass species. And so always remember to check the label before you use the herbicide in your cropping system. And other factors to consider include the stage of the weed. For example, the picture I put here, the barnyard grass is quite tall. At this stage, if you are spraying a post-emergence herbicide, it won't give you very good control. So don't try to do that. Consider what's your weed stages and also your crop stage. So if your crop is growing and there is a certain threshold or timing to apply the herbicide, be sure to consider that. And also the application timing, the herbicide selectivity we talked about earlier, broadleaf herbicide compared to the grass-only herbicide, and also the weather. So if the weather is windy, if the wind is 30 miles per hour, don't spray your herbicide because you don't want that to happen. So there might be drift or other issues happening with the weather. So check the weather before you make your applications. And specifically to the vineyard, we talked about the mechanical control using undervine cultivation or mowing between the rows or cultivation, flaming, electrical weeding, and cultural control like plant cover crops and use mulches, and chemical control with different herbicides and herbicide programs. And also, earlier I mentioned about the crop stage. So if it's a newly planted vineyard or new planting of the trees or vineyard, so there are restrictions for certain herbicide that you can't use within the first 3 years. So make sure that you check the limitations. And sometimes those newly established plants are very vulnerable. So you might not want to cultivate or just need to be extra careful for those newly planted crops. And here is a picture of a new vineyard planting. And so because of the irrigation system, so half of the rows or wherever the weeds are growing vigorously, those are because the water through the drip system, the water is getting taken over by the weeds, and that's why they're growing so well. And here, so we're gonna have a look at one example. So we conducted a study in the past 2 years. So to look at the use of different non-chemical control method to control the weeds through cultivation, undervine mowing, and electrical weeding. So we're comparing the different non-chemical weed control method and to see how well they're working in our vineyard at the station Prosser. So the location is on one of our vineyards at Prosser Station. The plot size is not very big, so only 6 lines on 2 panels per plot. And experimental design is a randomized complete block design with 4 replications. So there are 5 treatments. The treatments are listed over on the right side. So you can see the plot view is over here. So every 6 line is a plot. And treatment, we included cultivation as a standard, non-treated. And for comparison, the standard is the cultivation. And then we have undervine mowing 1 time through the season, undervine mowing 2 times through the season. And we also have electrical weeding 1 time through the season and 2 times through the season. Over here is a map of how the trial looks like. And so those same colors are the same treatment, and they are all randomized through the whole trial. So also in an adjacent field, we apply the same treatment on a fallow ground. So here is a picture of the fallow ground. So nothing is growing there but the weeds. And the plot size, we set up plot 20 feet by 30 feet. And we don't have randomization for this one, and it's only 1 plot. So it's a long strip plot. And the herbicide treatment, we selected Rely, which is glufosinate. It's a post-emergence herbicide. And also we have another treatment, Rely in tank mixture with Gamma, which is tiafenoso. It's a pre-emergence herbicide. So we have a post-only herbicide treatment and a post and pre-tank mixture treatment and Zedrol. So both Gamma and Zedrol have residual activity. Those are pre-emergence herbicide. And so here is a plot map. The number 1, it's the same treatment as the trial I showed earlier. So the number one is cultivation, and then we have 2, 3, those are undermine mowing. And then we have 4 and 5, those are electrical weeding once and twice. And 6 and 7, 6 is the pre-emergence only, and 7 is the pre and post-tech mixture. And so just going to show some plot pictures. And so those pictures are taken in 2024. So on the very left side is an untreated, which is cultivation. And then the electrical weeding once is over here. It was applied on April 18th, 2024. And this picture was taken about 3 weeks later. So this is taken on May 8th, 2024. You can see where the metal plate went through. So over here looks very clean compared to the other areas. And over here is the electrical weeding twice through the season. So this picture was taken on June 18th, 2024, and the second electrical weeding treatment went out on June 10th, 2024. So you can see the difference over here compared to another plot, adjacent plot over here. And then for the fallow ground, this is how it might be more obvious over here. So the electrical weeding was applied on April 18th, 2024. And this is about 3 weeks after the application. You can clearly see where the machine, the unit went through. And over here is 5 weeks after the application. So you can see the effect of the electrical weeding lasted for quite a while. So more than a month. And then here is a picture that shows, 2 pictures that shows you the herbicide treated ones. And so these are taken about 2 weeks after the herbicide application went out. We used a bicycle sprayer, so the coverage is more, so just about 10 feet. So the brown area is wherever we sprayed. And you can see a clear comparison there. Both are working very well. And the one on the right has the pre-emergence herbicide tech mixture. So there are pictures I didn't put here, but those effect went longer because it has residual activity. So any questions at this point? Okay, Julie, yes.
Is there any fire hazard with electrical weeding?
There is, yes. So especially the first application when it went out on April, like mid-April, at that time everything was fine. But in June, we did have to follow the electrical weeding machine and use a shovel to put out some fire. And so the timing of this technology, if it can be used, how long this technology can be used, like there is a fine window there. So that's why we are still doing research and trying to get some more specific answers. Yeah, good question. Thank you.
How does it impact the microbial community?
So the microbial community, we collected samples, the soil samples, but we didn't analyze that part. So we're gonna do this study again this year, and we're hoping to have a commercial farm and do like a larger plot size and collect more data from there. So we would get your advice on how to collect data on that. So thanks, Liz. Any other questions? Okay, if not, we'll keep going. So next I'll be talking more about on the herbicide side because the herbicides are very useful and there are a lot of, for our crops in the region, all the specialty crops, we actually don't have as many compared to the crops like for soybean and corn, those large row crops. And so we really need to use our herbicide and be a good steward of our herbicide options that are labeled for our crops in the region, especially like grapes and tree fruits and those perennial crops. And so I'm gonna talk more on the herbicide side. So here is a picture, very colorful picture that shows you how the herbicides are grouped together. So this is actually being updated. So there is an updated version, just came out in 2026. So over here, you can see they're grouped together based on their how they work within the plant cell system, the plant system. So some herbicides are light activation and some are cellular metabolism. So they work within the cell system. And then over here are some that works on the process of the cell division and growth. And so those are how the herbicides are grouped together based on how they work within the plant system. And then over here are some examples. The glyphosate, glufosinate rely belongs to group 10. And then there are other herbicides that are from other groups. So based on their mechanisms of action. And then with the herbicides, after we use it, many applications, so there is a chance that the weed population would develop resistance to those herbicides. And so here is a simple kind of graph that shows you how the herbicide resistance developed within weed population. So for the A picture over here, you can see that one plant survived the application. Other plants are all dead. So this is a weed population. So the brown ones are the ones that have been controlled by this herbicide application, but only one plant survived. And this B picture shows you that one plant can produce a lot of seeds. So growing on a cropland. And then after a year or 2 years or several years, the same herbicide group, if you are using that same herbicide to control the weeds in that field, there will be more plants that are not controlled, showing the green. And over the years, so the weed population would have more plants surviving the herbicide treatment. And what it may look like at the end would be not so many are controlled by this herbicide. So that's when the population of the weed develop resistance to the herbicide. So here are some pictures that shows you how it might look like. So these first year, second year, third year, these are just the estimation. So it could take 5 years or 10 years. The time frame is just an estimation. So here is the plant that survived the herbicide application, cropland. And here it may look like you can see the crop rows. It's a very blurry picture because I zoomed it out. But you can see the weeds surviving the treatment. There are more plants surviving the treatment. And then what it may look like many years later would be the whole field is taken over by the resistant weed population. So here is a table that shows you the herbicide resistant weeds in the state of Washington. And these are all available online if you're interested. So there are weed species, for example, in as early as 1970s, there has been a report of a weed species resistant to semazine herbicide, and this was found in nurseries. And the list continues. There are more and more screening work going on and more populations of the weeds being confirmed with the herbicide resistance to different groups of herbicides. And here is a graph that shows you the herbicide resistant species for the top 10 weed families. So there are some families that has weed species that are more prone to develop herbicide resistance. And for example, the first one is the grass family. So we have many species like barnyard grass, goosegrass, crabgrass, all falls into this family. And so there are 92 species within this family that has resistance reported for different herbicides. And there are other ones, but we won't spend too much time here. If you're interested, welcome to go online and look up the herbicide resistance database. And so here's the question, how to identify the herbicide resistance, because the susceptible weed and the resistant weed they look the same, almost like looking at a mirror, the same picture. So usually we collect samples from the field if there are populations of the weeds surviving the applications, and sometimes we get calls from growers, or sometimes we do a survey and collect samples, and then we bring them back to the greenhouse, grow them out, and then do some testing on those. So I'll talk more in the next slide. And sometimes we also send samples to the labs, and they would be able to identify the resistance if there is a gene mutation or if there are other structure for the weed that have changed. So here is the picture on the left, shows you how we do herbicide screening in the greenhouse condition. So we have weed seed, and then we sow them, we spread them in those trays, and then spray different herbicides or herbicides at different doses. And then we collect data on how many seedlings survived or do a rating on what's the injury level. And on the right shows you what it looks like. So these are treated with glyphosate. On the left is a susceptible population, and on the right is a resistant population. So you can see the resistant population, they were treated with the same herbicide at the same dose. So on the right side, the resistant population have survived that application. So that gives you an idea of how we conduct this type of research. And talking about the resistance, we have different mechanisms. And so mainly there's target site resistance and non-target site resistance. So for the target site resistance, it usually occurs when there is a change in the structure of the plant's target site, either a protein or a site change, so the herbicide can no longer work. Here's a picture shows you the differences. So on the left side, the susceptible weed, you can see the herbicide module fit perfectly into the susceptible weed. And on the right side, because there is a change in the resistant weed, so the binding site looks different. So the herbicide that used to bind to that site doesn't work anymore. That's how the weed population no longer takes that herbicide. So they don't react to it and won't be controlled by it. And another type of target site resistance shows as the increase in the expression of the target site, or the copies of the gene that codes for that protein have been amplified. So usually that shows that the plant produces higher level of that protein, or the herbicide could not have enough herbicide to bind into those sites. So over here shows you how that works. So on the left side is a susceptible weed. On the right side is the resistant weed. So you can see the orange color. Okay, I'm gonna go really fast over here. So please follow. So over here, the orange sites are the herbicide, and then also the orange sites are the target site protein. And you can see on the right side, those have been increased, the number of the target site protein. And so that's when the plant can take in more herbicide. So the resistant populations of the weeds are. And we won't go into too details, but another type would be the non-target site resistance. And this usually shows as when the process within the plant prevents the herbicide from reaching to the target site. So what it looks like is sometimes the plant could metabolize more. So there is a change in the structure within the plant, or sometimes it could be the thicker cuticle, and the herbicide could not go into the plant. So those are the types of non-target site resistance. And the take-home message would be just consider using integrated weed management strategies to manage the weeds in your cropping systems, and also use herbicides with different site of action, and also be a good steward of the current technologies and the weed control herbicide options that we have. And with that, I'll take any questions. So I think I used up all Devin's time. Any questions for the second part of the?
Thanks, Ray.
Yes.
Yeah, if we have any questions in the room, we can start with those and then we'll move over to Zoom. Questions?
If not, thank you all for your attention, and welcome to reach me if you have any additional questions.
Yeah, it sounds like we do have one question on Zoom. They say, is there any specific herbicides you'd recommend for vineyards or apple orchards?
So we have a really good resource from WSU and also the Pacific Northwest Weed Management Handbook. So I can send the link out, and for specifically, like I said earlier, there are a couple of factors you need to consider for choosing the herbicide programs. And so I'm happy to discuss more, or just whoever asked that questions, yeah, I'm happy to get connected and answer that.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, we'll share Ray's email so that you have it if you want to follow up. I think that's it.
Thank you.